Multiple investigations now underway to figure out how Jeffrey Epstein, an accused sex trafficker and a registered sex offender, ended up dead after apparently taking his own life inside a jail cell over the weekend. The New York City Medical Examiner's Office said Sunday they do not have an official cause of death, but have not found any signs of foul play. Meanwhile, there are a ton of questions about how exactly all of this happened. For one, Epstein had been on suicide watch after being found passed out in his own jail cell on July 23rd with marks on his neck. But NBC News has learned he was taken off suicide watch following a psychiatric evaluation less than a week later. In addition, Epstein was found alone, and questions are being raised about why he didn't have a cellmate like he previously did. And while the guards were supposed to be checking on Epstein every 30 minutes, officials are now investigating to see if that actually happened. Attorney General Bill Barr said over the weekend that he is, quote, appalled at Epstein's death, and said both the FBI and the Justice Department will investigate. Epstein had been waiting trial on federal sex trafficking and conspiracy charges and was facing up to 45 years behind bars. Tom Winter has been digging into all of this for us. He's NBC's correspondent for investigations. Tom, we should point out this wasn't just about Jeffrey Epstein. One of the reasons he was such a high-profile prisoner is the tangled web in which he lived, all of the major power players that could be implicated. At this point, there are no signs of foul play from the autopsy, but there's no conclusion on cause of death. Why not?
Well, I think, Stephanie, look, this is going to be a death that's going to be studied for the next 15, 20 plus years. The medical examiner in New York City is typically cautious, and I think they want to take a step back, give it a chance to look at every single possible thing. I'll propose a hypothetical. Say that there's a cut on his hand, or say there's an abrasion on his palm that the medical examiner notices. She may want to go back and say, OK, FBI, can you talk to the BOP and ask them about this? Did he take a fall? Was there some sort of an incident that happened in the days prior? Can we get video of that from the hallways? There's no video of cells, so of course there's going to be no video of this. It's that type of thing, Stephanie, that they would want to go back and just double check. You know, is there anything here that may come up in the course of the FBI's investigation into this? Is there anything that guards may say that may help enlighten this, enlighten the findings and what they found on Jeffrey Epstein's body, and vice versa? So I think at this point we're just looking at an investigation that wants to take a little bit of time, wants to be a little bit cautious, make sure that they have all their facts together before they come out with that final determination. But as you said, still no sign of foul play, and suicide is still presumed to be the leading cause here. And how long do these investigations take, and what happens to all that was being investigated and the value of his testimony before he died? Well, really, the value of Epstein's testimony, he had not talked to federal investigators. He had not appeared before a grand jury. So that kind of eliminates that. As far as any depositions or any statements his attorneys may have made, well, those are preserved and are memorialized for the record, and those could be introduced at a trial involving any other potential co-conspirators if we get to that point. With regards to the ongoing investigation, it is ongoing, and that's from the U.S. Attorney's mouth, Geoffrey Berman. He put out a statement Saturday afternoon saying, you know, first off, if there's any more victims, give us a call. We still want to hear from you. And on top of that, he said that any investigation into that conspiracy count that you mentioned, Stephanie, that will go on as well. So this is not over, so to speak, with regards to Epstein and the criminal investigation. All right. Thank you, Tom Winter. We got to go a lot further into this. I want to bring in Ari Melber, NBC's chief legal correspondent and anchor, of course, of The Beat here on MS every day at 6 p.m. David Enrich, finance editor for the New York Times. He's been looking at Epstein's financial ties, and they have been crushing it on some unbelievable reporting around how specifically Epstein made so much money. Barrett Berger is with us, former federal prosecutor for the Southern and Eastern Districts of New York. Ari Melber, to you first. How big of a deal is this? Epstein, maybe the most high-profile prisoner, at least in the news cycle right now.
Absolutely in the news cycle right now, probably after El Chapo, the second most important in all of U.S. custody now, dead. This is a are you kidding me moment for Bill Barr's Justice Department. This was someone who, as you reported, as we've discussed, was known to allegedly have attempted a suicide. At least that was investigated initially. Then is taken off the type of precautions that would be necessary, as you mentioned. And then this happens. It is a huge, huge deal.
Barrett, does it make sense to you? He's put on suicide watch, taken off less than a week later. He had a roommate. Suddenly he didn't. Why would he be in a situation where he could take his own life?
Yeah, I mean, the Bureau of Prisons, the BOP, is going to have a lot of really hard questions to answer about the decisions that they made with respect to Epstein. I mean, my guess is you will hear things like, one, the cost of staffing somebody, right, to have somebody with eyes on an inmate 24/7, but also that...
Okay, hold on.
Yes.
The cost of staffing for this particular person, right? They couldn't find the money. Somebody who has ties to a current president, a former president, business leaders in banking, private equity, Hollywood, royal family members. Give me a break. They didn't have the money for that?
Right. And I mean, even more so, that there's reporting that came out that the guards that were staffed with watching Epstein had been working several back-to-back shifts, were on, a series of overtimes, so perhaps weren't at the, peak of their ability to actually monitor the situation. But I just want to throw out the second piece, which is I do think that institutions, and whether this is right or wrong, and again, the POP is going to have to answer to this, but I think there is a hesitancy as to keeping somebody on suicide watch for too long of an extended period. A, because of the cost, but B, because it's also, incredibly invasive for the prisoner. So, for example, they aren't given a sheet, so they're sleeping on sort of a bare mattress. They're put in a special cell where there may not be, ventilation that they could use to potentially hang themselves. So I think there are reasons potentially that the Bureau of Prisons moved him off, although clearly it was not appropriate in this case, and they're going to have to answer to these questions.
All right, I want to read what Jack Scarola said. This is an attorney for some of Epstein's victims. He writes this: "It simply does not make common sense that Jeffrey Epstein was not on suicide watch, and it does not make common sense that if he was on suicide watch, he could have successfully taken his own life unless he had some outside help." Ari Melber, I turn back to you on this. This is embarrassing. The Attorney General is outraged. People are upset. But outrage and upset goes away in a couple of days. Why would people in positions of power not ensure that Jeffrey Epstein was safe, given all that I'm not even going to get into all the conspiracy theories, but holy cow, he is tied to some of the most powerful people on planet Earth.
Well, I think you're asking the right questions. The Attorney General says that he's appalled. The Attorney General is in charge of the Justice Department and the Bureau of Prisons. This is like that thing when sometimes Donald Trump says, "Can you believe what the federal government is up to?" And you want to say, "You run the federal government." So there's a lot of that whataboutism and blame shifting. I think when you mention some of the conspiracies, and again, it shouldn't be normalized. It is outrageous to have the President of the United States, who has his own history and links to this person, whose own labor,
as does Bill Barr,
as do many of these folks, as you say, to try to turn that around and deflect. If they are not, as Barrett mentioned, if they're not funding and staffing the Bureau of Prisons appropriately, that goes to the systemic part. And as you say, yeah, people may want to move on in a couple of days. That's the larger question. This is not the only important person in U.S. custody. This is just probably one of the most controversial, rightly reviled, now dead, famous people in custody. But the Bureau of Prisons is underfunded. They have struggled under an acting director with a president who says he likes acting. They had a deputy director vacancy for a while. This takes us back to bigger things that are a little more intricate, which is Donald Trump's lack of interest in staffing and funding his own cabinet, his own agencies, piled onto, yes, the questions about, as we're looking on the screen, the fact that he had a history with this person, the Clintons did. I would point out again, while we're talking about responsibility, it was the Obama Justice Department that initially signed off on a far too lenient deal, according to many experts we've consulted. So there's a lot that's been wrong with this case from the very first inception to this now embarrassing in custody death.
And it's because of great journalism. Out of the Miami Herald, Julie Brown will be joining us later in the hour. I want to go back to what we cover every day here, following the money, David. Jeffrey Epstein's finances have been a huge question. You and your team have been answering a whole lot of the whats. But what do we do with the whys? I mean, at the very surface, Les Wexner, his main source of income, who just a week ago you reported, Wexner said that Epstein had stolen from him. They recovered $49 million. You've got his ties to Leon Black from Apollo, Ghislaine Maxwell being his number two. Ghislaine Maxwell's father died, a con man and a swindler, owing banks $4 billion. All of the questions we have around how Epstein had all of this money and these ties, what have you learned, and are you going to be able to get more answers now that he's dead?
Well, that's exactly what we're trying to figure out right now. What we've learned so far is that Epstein, while he would go around saying he's a billionaire and he's a money manager, there's no evidence of either of those things. What he was very good at was insinuating himself into high-profile situations with some of the world's most prominent and successful businessmen. And he managed to do that remarkably even after he was convicted of sex crimes and had to register as a sex offender. So you have very senior executives at J.P. Morgan, at Apollo, the big private equity firm, Les Wexner, the CEO of the company that owns Victoria's Secret. And these guys all continued to do business or have financial connections with Epstein long after he had been publicly tarred. And we don't know why.
Whether or not he was a billionaire, he lived in the second most valuable private residence in New York City. He's got a ranch in New Mexico. He owns an island off of St. John, an apartment in Paris, and a place in Miami. He had a whole lot of dough.
Don't forget the private planes.
Don't forget the okay. Then to you, Barrett, what happens to the subpoenas we already know? We know that 2 weeks ago, Epstein's lawyers of his private planes were subpoenaed. They know exactly who have been on, what do they call it, the Lolita Express. What happens to all of these requests for information? Do they fade away or do we get answers?
So they don't necessarily fade away. So I think the case and the investigations continue sort of in two different ways. So the criminal charges against Epstein himself by the Southern District of New York, those are going to be dismissed because he's dead. So obviously they can't proceed against him. But if you remember, the SDNY had included a conspiracy charge in their indictment against Epstein. So that necessarily means that he was at least alleged to have been conspiring or working with somebody else to do these crimes. So they would have the absolute authority to continue investigating to the extent that they're looking into who was he doing these crimes with. The other aspect of this now is my guess is there will be civil forfeiture cases. So
what does that mean?
So this is a way that the government could go after his assets. So even though he's dead, you don't actually have a guilty finding to try to go after and recover somebody's assets. So for example, you're talking about his properties. The government could bring a civil forfeiture action to try to seize those and then potentially use that money to give some restitution to the victims. So there may be some hope that the victims will get a little bit of justice in this case, even if not their day in court with him.
What do you think? I mean, it was just Friday. Documents were unsealed. We were all waiting for September to come to find out more information about this man's lifestyle and his ties. You think we'll get that info?
I think the reason that some knowledgeable people are so upset on the justice side is without him being alive, you can't ultimately crack him and get more information directly from him.
But even, let's say he was never going to speak. All the information, the documents that were out there, will we get to see them?
Well, I mean, anything that the government has or had is still there, right? And they can move on that. And to Barrett's point, they can indict the other co-conspirators if they have enough to move. But I think that people may be less afraid of a dead man than a living one.
Can I say something, though? The banks are the key to this, once again. And your favorite bank, my favorite bank, Deutsche Bank, is right in the middle of this, has been poring over Epstein's financial records, where he had dozens of accounts there until about a month and a half ago. And from what I hear inside the bank, they're starting to find stuff that connects Epstein to other banks and other individuals. And this could be a real treasure trove of information. They're handing this over already to federal authorities, including SDNY. So I think this is going to be, there's a lot more to come on this.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.